Hello and welcome. My name is Zaffar Iqbal and you are watching the Mojo Story. President Putin has arrived in India. We can quickly cut across to those live pictures you can see on that screen. Prime Minister Modi has gone to the airport to receive Putin. Now, Putin arrives during a delicate moment in India-US relations as just as Delhi moves closer to free trade agreement with the US and the EU. You can see on that screen, that's the flight. He was scheduled to arrive uh, at around 7 p.m. and that's exactly what has happened. He's arrived and Prime Minister Modi has gone to airport to welcome President Putin to India and to receive him. This is a very significant visit, not just optics, but lot of substance. And it's not just bilateral between India and Russia. There'll be it closely watched by other countries, particularly the European countries and America, as President Putin arrives in India. Now, does this visit strengthen India's bargaining power or complicate its negotiations with the West? Remember, President Trump has slapped 50% tariffs on India. 25% of that is specifically for buying Russian oil. You can see those live visuals on your screen. That's the flight. It's just stopped, and uh, and President Putin will be coming out from that flight. It's a very significant visit, 2 day visit, his first visit since the Ukraine war began. Now, what message is Moscow trying to send to Washington, Brussels, and Beijing? That's also very important and very significant. As I was saying, it will be a focus of attention for other world powers as well. Now, India and Russia are discussing Su-57 S-500, new BrahMos versions, and additional S-400 deliveries, all part of defense deals. Now, those are some of the things that will come up in those negotiations. But clearly, this visit coming after US sanctions that have already affected India's ability to buy discounted Russian oil. To get a sense of what all we can expect from this visit, we are today joined by an eminent panel. Let's introduce our guests: Ambassador Dilip Sinha, former diplomat, and Major General Dhruv Katoch, Director, India Foundation. Welcome to Mojo Story. Ambassador Dilip Sinha, Prime Minister going to receive the President. Of course, it's not breaking the protocol, but there is a strong message in this gesture that the Prime Minister goes there to welcome the Russian President to India.
Yes, there is no doubt that it's a very personal gesture extended to President Putin. They have obviously developed a certain degree of camaraderie that was evident in Tianjin when they had met a few months earlier. So it is certainly a message to Putin to reassure him that India is a friend and that India values its relations with Russia. So, and this visit is also being played up domestically for obvious reasons.
Absolutely. But it's come at a delicate moment when India US relations uh, have taken a hit because of Trump's the way that he has been uh, hitting out at India over the last few months, particularly on the issue of tariffs. That makes this trip even more significant because Russia is the problem area for America. They've been saying India, going to the extent of saying that India is sponsoring the Russian war in Ukraine and it's Modi's war. One of the members of Trump administration said that. So it's very significant in that way as well, Ambassador Dilip Sinha.
Well, it is significant, but I don't think we should attach too much importance or link the two. I think these are two standalone relationships.
Yeah.
India's problems of trade with the US are both because of the trade deficit that the US has in its trade with India, and also because of the issue that came up because of Trump's claim that he had mediated between India and Pakistan. He did not take lightly to the fact that India completely repudiated whatever role he may have played or he claimed to have played in the matter. But I don't think we should link the two developments. India's relationship with Russia is on the strategic side on defense cooperation, whereas with the US, it's a much wider relationship, and the loss of our export market to the US is being felt by our by
Yeah.
economy, and we need to address that separately. I don't think Trump was necessarily he used the excuse of India buying oil from Russia, but so many other countries are buying oil from Russia, and Trump did nothing about that. So I think that was essentially
Right.
just a ruse.
Absolutely. That's a very important point. General Dhruv Katoch, a very unusual development happened. Some of these European envoys wrote an article, an op-ed in a newspaper, and they rather criticized the President Putin's policies towards Ukraine. Now, given the fact that EU has been trying to broker an agreement, a deal between Russia and Ukraine, and Ukraine has also said that India can become a deal maker between the two countries. But India has said that when both the countries, are in favor of mediation, then only India can mediate. India has not, said that it's going to mediate between the Russia and Ukraine as far as the war is concerned.
Thank you, Zaffar. Zafar, firstly, the certain foreign ambassadors of Western Europe, of the European countries, they gave interviews to the media, to the press, and those interviews were published. Firstly, I think it was, in my personal view, it was very petty. They had absolutely no cause to go down that path. Information warfare is okay, but to use the media and the Indian media at that to vent personal grouses against the Russian president and the war in Ukraine, I think was uncalled for. That's the first one. Of course, in a counter, the Russian ambassador also gave an interview, and so it really became a war of interviews. You see, there is a larger point in all this. There is, in my view, firstly, I totally agree with what the ambassador has said. The sanctions which the Americans have placed, it really has nothing much to do with the oil. I think it shows up a measure of frustration that the US has not been able to pull off a peace deal. In my view, the American president was trying all sort of pressure stunts, including, talking about India buying oil and starting the war, etc. No, I think there is fundamentally something deeper going on. We will, of course, President Putin is coming. We will talk about trade and defense and all those things. But fundamentally, there is a shift in the world order. I think that we have to understand first. The old order is giving way, but nothing new has been created as yet. So what has to come, we do not know. But we do know that the Bretton Woods system is on the way out. It won't last very long. And especially the way the financial system has been weaponized through sanctions. I think it is something which has caused great consternation across the world, because if they sanction Russia today, obviously they can sanction India tomorrow and somebody else day after and seize your assets. So a new system is going to come up. And I think that is what the world's consternation is about, especially the US and Europe, because Russia and India are amongst the BRICS, two of the three major powers. You put China into it again, and then you have a very large grouping. Add Brazil and South Africa and everybody else, it keeps getting bigger and bigger. What will that new grouping be like? I think that is their consternation, and they don't want really India to do something which will be totally antithetical to Western interests. Now, I think, that will be their concern. I think as far as India is concerned, we will be looking at Indian interests.
I wanted to ask that question. What are Indian interests and expectations from this visit?
No, I think one of our expectations is it will really be on the weapons imports. As to, there are two basic things on the weapon systems. One is in air defense and one is in fighter aircraft. Now, in air defense, we have already got the S-400. We'll be looking at 2 additional regiments. And the S-400 has been an excellent system, tried and tested. But now we are looking at the S-500 also. And the S-500 will give total reach. So as of now, we are in a position to cover, to provide the requisite grade of air defense cover to certain specific targets. But once we get the S-500, then what the Prime Minister was talking about, the Sudarshan Chakra, we are in a better position to achieve that along with the other systems that we have and provide an all India coverage, especially at the strategic level. So if somebody wants to throw a missile from a few thousand kilometers away, which will leave the atmosphere and then re-enter, it is the S-500 which will actually be able to detect and destroy those incoming nuclear warheads. So if you look at it in that way, that will be one important component, the air defense. The second is going to be the fighter aircraft. Now, the Tejas has been an excellent indigenous system, but the Tejas is not enough. The Tejas is simply a replacement for the MiGs, which have been phased out. So for the heavier caliber of aircraft, the AMCA is under development, but that will take some time. As a stopgap measure, we have taken the Rafales and we have already got the Su-30s. Now, this has to be ramped up. I presume that they'll be looking at another 2 squadrons at least or 2 of the Rafales, but a much larger component of the Su-57, the latest aircraft which the Russian, which is in the Russian armory. And here in this particular aircraft, in the Su-57, I think there will be a question. It'll be a triple sort of a thing. I don't know what the deal is going to be, but there will be an outright purchase one. Then there will be a certain quantum which will be manufactured in India. And third, I think there is going to be some element of a TOT. The third is vital for India. This is what India has been seeking from the US also, the transfer of technology. And from the American side, they are very keen that we get onto the F-35. Yes. I personally feel that is not going to be a good buy for India. One, it is very, very expensive. And secondly, the Americans will continue having a hold over you, which is not a desirable thing.
Yes,
so
the end user agreements and all that. But Ambassador Dilip Sinha, the point that General Saab was raising about S-400, when India bought those S-400, it was not easy. It was taking a very bold step at that time because there was a threat of sanctions, as US has put sanctions on Turkey, which also wanted to buy S-400s. But now if we want to get another batch of S-400s, what's the guarantee now? Perhaps the US will put sanctions now on India for the purchase of those S-400s. So it's not going, because things have changed. The equation between India and US, what was at that time when we bought those S-400s, is different than what is now.
Well, as far as the defense equipment and the necessity is concerned, General Katoch is the expert on this. I'm not an expert on what equipment we require. What I can certainly say is that, yes, there will be the risk of further sanctions from the US in case we go ahead, as there was the case in the case of S-400, which they held back because of other strategic considerations. Yeah. Now with President Trump around there, one can never rule out such possibilities. But then we have to look at our defense requirements and go ahead regardless of what other countries say or do. In this, we must be clear in our minds. Current global order has collapsed. Now we have to look at each relationship as a standalone relationship. So relations with Russia should be dealt with Russia, with China separately with China, with America separately with China, because the groups have all collapsed now. Even the largest alliance, NATO, is in disarray. So we have to look at each relationship on its own merits and use it for our own national interest and to promote our economic interests. Now, in this, we have to keep in mind that in the case of Russia, now while buying from Russia is if it's required, we have to buy from there. But how do we buy from Russia? We need hard currency for that. And where do we earn the hard currency? Now, the problem that has come up now is that earlier we used to earn our hard currency by exporting to the US and the EU. Now, these two do not want to allow us to use the dollars that we earn there for buying from Russia, as we are buying from Russia or from China. So that will become the major problem. And so Putin will have to start buying more from India, start importing more from India, if it wants India to buy more from Russia. Otherwise, we'll pile up rupees. Russia will pile up rupees in India in the Reserve Bank and then use it for interference in our internal affairs. Now, all big powers use their powers of interference regardless of the interests of our country. So we have to be careful about that. That how do we pay for the imports that we need to make.
That's a very important one. There was some talk about rupee ruble sort of an arrangement. Will that be a possibility, or that's not going to happen so soon? It can be just in the realm of a thought.
No, you see, this had been done in the case of the rupee trade with the Soviet Union. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, we had crores of rupees piled up in the RBI, which belonged to the Soviet Union. And then we had to pay back those rupees at an artificial rate in US dollars to Russia, because Russia demanded that it should not be at the current price because the ruble had collapsed, and we had to pay back at the current at a very high rate. Right. So the fact is that if we are going to buy from Russia in rupees, then Russia will accumulate rupees in the RBI. Now, what will it do with those rupees? Unless it uses the rupees to buy from India, it will then use the rupees to pay off people, bribe people here and there, or pay money to.
It's very complicated. It's very complicated. We have pictures of Prime Minister Modi at the airport. We can have it on full screen as we talk. Ambassador Sinha, one thing that is always thinking about when we talk about Russia, India, we mostly talk about weapons, fighter jets, missiles. But why is the thrust never on people to people sort of a relation? Exchange between people of India and people of Russia, although there is so much of a goodwill between the two countries and between the two people, but that never really takes the focus. The focus is always on what are the weapons that we are using, what are the defense system, what are the jets, and all of that.
That is absolutely true. Our relationship with Russia is essentially a one-dimensional relationship. It's a relationship of defense purchases. Yeah. Earlier, when we required the Soviet Union's veto in the Security Council, there was that requirement. But today, fortunately, we are in a much better position. We don't require the Russian veto, but we may at some point require it. That's a separate issue. But otherwise, Russia is a very small economy. It's not even among the top 10 economies in the world. Our total exports to Russia are less than $5 billion. Now, in this situation, for Indians to go to Russia, there has to be greater people-to-people contact. Our people must feel comfortable in Russia. Russia's weather is extremely difficult for Indians. Language is a huge problem, which is why our total the Indian community in Russia is, I think, about 15,000. That's the number of people.
Now it's said to have increased, but not substantially.
And it is a further risk to it. If more workers go, we don't know whether Putin will put them to the war in Ukraine.
Yes,
and then we get them back.
I wanted to ask that to General Katoj. General Katoj, we have been reporting that as well. People, particularly from Punjab, going to Russia as workers, then pushed on to the battle lines with then they make those appeals, they send out those videos. We are stuck, firing is going on. That's another problem that's been coming up from time to time. They're Indian people. For some reason, either they have gone there or they have been cheated, but they are at the war front, and some of the Indians have taken casualties as well.
Very frankly, of course, once a person goes to the war and he finds it uncomfortable, then he certainly says he's being cheated. But everybody knows what's happening there. So when the Indian is going, he knows that there's a very high possibility of his going to the war, but he has a feeling that, okay, he'll be kept in the base areas and he'll be doing other duties. So he's quite prepared for that. Now, it doesn't really work out that way. So, I don't give innocence to these people who have gone to Russia. It is our duty to get them back because they don't want to fight that war. But in my view, they shouldn't have gone there in the first place. It's a war zone, things are going wrong, and yet you go in the hope that, okay, the war will hit somebody else.
Yeah.
And I don't think, as far as the Russia, as far as soldiering is concerned, you can't just take a person who's totally unwilling and, tell him to fight. It doesn't work that way. There has to be a certain level of motivation. So when people have gone, I think they're prepared for the risk, but they're not really prepared for the amount of hardship which they will face there. That is where the difference comes. Now, these same people will be prepared to face that hardship in India because, their colleagues are there, everybody else is there, the language is the same, the food is the same. You can discuss these things. Out there, he's isolated. And when you're isolated and you're working in those hardship areas, you find it is not what you had bargained for. Right. So he wants to come back. And then, of course, those excuses will come that I actually went for some other job, but they put me here, and I can understand that. That is a defense mechanism which people will give. But there aren't too many of such cases, and
Yeah.
they will continue occurring. I mean, that's the way life is.
Right. Janet Saab, I want to ask you specifically about this reloss agreement between Russia and India about using each other's military bases for logistics and for other support. How India already has an arrangement with the US, but with Russia, how significant it is, and what does it actually mean?
It basically, firstly, let me talk about with the Americans. It means that, let us say there's an American base in the Indian Ocean, and we require our aircraft to be refueled, right? So we can go and get it refueled from there, right? There is a payment mechanism which they have already sorted out. And if the American aircraft or ships require the same facilities or logistic facilities in India, we provide that to them. Now, with Russia, I'm not very sure what the Russian facilities are in the Indian Ocean region. But then we also have our people in Kazakhstan, etc., wherever they are going. And if it is required, then we can use Russian logistic facilities based on this agreement, because then the payment system has been sorted out. That
Yeah.
this is how we carry out the inter-transfer.
Right.
And
It's
similarly, now
already
if the
been
Russians
cleared.
would
It's
require
already
these,
been cleared by the Russian parliament just days
yes.
before this visit.
Yeah, so this will go through. You see, so I think based exactly on the American model, we'll have this also. I don't think it is not really a war fighting system. It is much
Yeah.
more of a peacetime effort,
Yeah.
especially in cyclones, etc., etc. When you require if the Russians require some assistance, they've got their ships there. They have to be fueled or something. Well, they can come to a port, and we will provide them those logistic facilities, and those things will be sorted out. Beyond that, I don't see there is much to it. It will be a cause of concern, I believe, to the West. But similarly, the way we are operating with the Americans is a cause of concern to the Russians. So everybody won't be happy at all the time. But I think as far as the Americans are concerned, they understand India's concerns. That we have a very high dependency on Russia for weapons and equipment, and for certain other purposes. And we will do what we have to do. America will do what they have to do. I mean, that's also part of the game. And then we have diplomats like Ambassador Sinha, who will get us out of the mess and keep both sides happy.
Ambassador Sinha, Trump has this habit of making one statement each day, more than a statement each day. In fact, for some days, there is no statement coming, which is rather strange. But we have had Trump also saying that India has decided that they are not going to buy Russian oil and it's going to come to a zero eventually. He made that statement. Now, the fact is also some of the companies have been sanctioned and India's buying of Russian oil has come down. What does this imply in the backdrop of this visit?
Well, the fact is that the American sanctions are what you would call dadagiri, because they don't have UN approval. Only the Security Council can impose sanctions. Individual countries, when they impose sanctions, that's a violation of international law. But all these countries have their own interests. The US, being the largest economy in the world, can enforce its sanctions, and it can do so through secondary sanctions. So any Indian company that deals with Russia will then face sanctions in America, and no Indian company would like to lose the American market because of dealings with Russia. So when America for the first time imposed sanctions on two Russian oil companies, that is when our companies decided that they would have to stop buying from Russia. Because earlier there was no sanction as such on buying oil from Russia. There was only a cap on the price.
Yeah.
So we were completely, even within the ambit of the American sanctions, by buying oil from Russia. But now that the two oil companies of Russia have come under sanctions, now of course our companies have reduced their oil import from Russia, and well, that's the situation that prevails right now.
Right. We've spoken about Indian expectations from this visit, but how would the world, particularly US, be watching those developments that are taking place? Prime Minister Modi, you can see on the screen, going personally to receive uh, President Putin. And also, there is some sort of a hypocrisy also here. Kushner and, you know, other American administration, Witkoff, Kushner, and others are in Russia trying to figure out some sort of a deal. On the other hand, America is putting pressure on India, how would they be really seeing all these developments? India has not buckled under pressure. The messaging is very clear that India has not severed its ties with Russia the way that America would want it to. India has asserted its strategic autonomy, but they would also be clearly watching all these developments.
Is that to me?
Yes.
Okay, now here I think we should be clear in our minds that we have to deal with Russia based on our national interests. Now, it is not as if there is an East-West confrontation in the world today.
Yeah.
President Trump has already invited and met Putin on US soil. So it is not as if Putin has not traveled to the US. Putin has visited the US 9 times and visited India also 9 times.
Yeah. This
Putin has
is
visited China 22 times. So it is, in this world today, there are no groups. Each country is pursuing relations with other countries, including the US with Russia. So if we pursue relations with Russia, we don't have to be apologetic about it.
Yeah.
We have to look at our economic interests, and we have to similarly look at our economic interests when we deal with Russia, with the US, or with the EU, or any other country for that matter. And I don't think we need to be apologetic about this in any manner.
Right. Last word to you, General Katoch. We saw that when the war erupted and India used its relation with Russia and Ukraine at that time, when that evacuation happened, those students were brought in. For that brief window, the war stopped. Actually, India was able to do that. The firing stopped and all those people were evacuated briefly. Now, perhaps that has given an impression that India has so much clout that it can actually stop the war between the two sides. There's some sort of a expectation from India, but India has not been in mediation unless and until both the countries ask India to mediate. Russia has not. So what is the way that India is going forward on that?
No, you see, I don't think India is in a position to carry out a mediation between the two parts. We don't have that clout.
Yeah.
Very frankly, the only country which had that clout is the United States.
Yeah.
And they are exercising it now by telling Ukraine to behave and come to the table and accept the terms. The US President's 29-point plan. It is really telling Ukraine, lump it and accept the terms. But this war, it would have ended very early had Britain not, poked the nose in. When the peace deal was going on, it was Britain and the other European nations, which egged on Zelensky to continue the fight.
Yeah.
Now, for them, it worked out very well because their weapon sales and all are going up. It's the entire arms lobby which has done very well in this war, nobody else. Ukraine has been ruined. Russia has been hit very badly. And all of us, indirectly, we've also suffered.
Absolutely.
So I think it is time that the war comes to an end. India's good offices comes to that extent that both the countries, Russia trusts India and Ukraine also trusts India. So we can be a neutral venue for them to talk.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the deal which they strike, the three people have to agree to it. The United States is 1, Ukraine is 2, and Russia is 3. And the Russian, the way I've understood it, is very, very clear. It is going to be, they're not going to leave any territory which they have taken. That is a non-starter.
Yeah.
So with that position, if Ukraine can accept it, I think then India can come along and do something and get the parties on board. But India really is not. I don't think India is really a player in making a deal at this point of time.
Right. And as President Trump keeps on saying that he has solved 8 wars, this is the 9th war, or perhaps he has solved 9, this is the 10th. And he thought that this would be the easiest to solve, but this has become the most difficult to solve. And perhaps this is what is holding, coming in between Nobel Prize and President Trump. Thanks so much to our panelists, Ambassador Dilip Sinha and General Dhruv Katoch, for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts. And thanks to our viewers for watching the Mojo Story. Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.